Welcome to Empowering People by Sharing Their Stories. This is a case study from Crossing Borders Music involving Rohingya musicians and sharing their music and stories. I'm Tom Clowes, the artistic director at Crossing Borders Music. This kind of work is something that we at Crossing Borders Music do very often because of the nature of our mission and our work, which is sharing through music the stories of people whose backgrounds are suppressed, often people who have experienced trauma. This case study comes from a particular project involving Rohingya musicians. For background, the Rohingya are an indigenous ethnic group from Myanmar or Burma. They are widely described as some of the most persecuted people in the world. They were stripped of their citizenship over decades and also forced to flee from their homes, which were destroyed over many decades and came to a head. This persecution came to a head in 2017 in the events commonly called the Rohingya genocide, leading to over 1 million people living in the world's largest refugee camps in Bangladesh, as well as many others living as internally displaced people in Myanmar. And there are Rohingya living as refugees in countries really around the world now. This collaborative project began at the invitation from the Rohingya community. And as we started to engage in this work, we spent many hours just hanging out with and getting to know what was really important to members of the Rohingya community, to have some sense of how to be able to collaborate with them and to put them in the center. Putting storytellers in the center is fundamental to our work. I think it's the one single most important thing that we do, is to do all that we can to empower storytellers who have already experienced marginalization to have as much control as possible over all of this process. We can offer our resources and support to the storytellers, and it should be up to them to decide if they want their stories shared with the world, and if so, how and for what purpose, and how they will be represented, and what stories are important to share, and for what purpose, and for how long those stories are shared. All of that contributes to the ownership of the stories by the storytellers, not to organizations like ours that help share those stories, and certainly not to the individuals and organizations that fund the work, who play an important role supporting the work. Unfortunately, we often see what I would consider the opposite. I'm calling it the pyramid theory for sharing stories, where the storytellers get crushed by the weight of organizations like ours, and especially funding organizations who do provide money sort of down the pyramid. Hopefully some of it might get to the storytellers and story sharers, but really they are expected in return to conform to the funders' expectations for what should happen. And so it is certainly frustrating when funders try to impose their ideas of what storytellers' stories should look like, for whom they should be shared, for what purpose, and so forth. So that is really, I would consider, an unethical practice, when either the funders or the story sharers impose on the storytellers how their stories should be shared. As soon as we started work on this Rohingya music collaborative project, we immediately experienced many unexpected delays. And I do credit the funders of this project for being very understanding about all of these delays. There were fires and other natural and human-caused disasters in the camps. There were very slow upload speeds. There were issues of cultural sensitivity that we needed to navigate responsibly. There was limited technological access for some members of the Rohingya community living as refugees in the camps. And I experienced secondary trauma, which I noticed subconsciously made me want to avoid engaging in this work, not because it wasn't important to me, but just because it dealt with such difficult and traumatic topics. And so I needed to tend to my own secondary trauma, which of course is not nearly as severe as the trauma of people who have experienced firsthand these events, but it is traumatic all the same. And anybody who engages in this work should just be aware that you will likely experience secondary trauma at some point in your engagement. So be prepared for that and tend to it if you experience it. In talking with the Rohingya musicians about this collaborative music project, in addition to sharing about their music and sharing their music with us, they also shared a request. They asked for help from the international community and for Crossing Borders Music to help them to be able to share their music and their cultural tradition with the young people, the young Rohingya, so that their cultural traditions and music traditions would stay alive in the world. This was certainly not what we were expecting, but again, by putting storytellers at the center of our work, it was a request that we took very seriously. And in fact, we are currently working on supporting the Rohingya musicians to be able to teach younger generations of Rohingya so that those cultural traditions are passed on to a younger generation. It's certainly not what we expected when we started this project, but we put storytellers at the center, and sometimes that leads us in unexpected directions. So thank you to Kamal Mustafa, pictured here, Auntie Mustafa, for making that request, and the other Rohingya musicians who also made the same request. How do we know, as non-Rohingya people, how to share Rohingya music? If we should even be sharing Rohingya music, how to share Rohingya stories, what themes are important? Well, we don't. We ask Rohingya musicians. They are the ones, and only they can decide who should play Rohingya music, who should share their stories, how, for what purpose. I had the great fortune to go to Bangladesh, to the world's largest refugee camps, and meet these Rohingya musicians. And I wasn't sure if it was appropriate to make music with them. And again, they let me know in no uncertain terms. They not only invited me, but insisted that I join them in jamming to Rohingya music. So here I am playing along. I would never have known if it was appropriate to play along with Rohingya musicians until they told me. So again, Rohingya musicians need to be at the center of a Rohingya music project. Something unexpected happened in my month with the Rohingya musicians in Bangladesh. The purpose of the project was cross-cultural understanding, and especially for me to gain information about our collaborative music project. And in the process of being there, when I was asking the musicians if they would want their images and their music recorded and shared with the world, or if they would prefer to remain anonymous or to not have their music and stories shared with the world, they said words that surprised me again, which were, please share who we are and especially our Rohingya cultural heritage and our stories and our history with the world. In fact, Uncle Liakot, Mr. Liakot Ali, pictured here, said, share our music and stories to Mars if possible. That request, again, was unexpected, but again, we put Rohingya musicians as the storytellers at the center of our work. And so we at Crossing Borders Music tried to do exactly that. It was important that this music and these cultural traditions and stories be documented and shared. And so we have created a portion of our website, an online Rohingya music library, which is one of the largest English language resources on Rohingya music anywhere. And it's available for anyone. I encourage you to take a look at it. You can learn more about Liakot and Mustafa and the other wonderful Rohingya musicians and learn about what their music means and why it's important. But again, this project was not something that we intended, but by putting storytellers at the center, It was a wonderful development. So thank you for sharing about this case study and this time with us. Again, I'm Tom Clowes, Artistic Director of Crossing Borders Music. And if there's one thing that we hope you remember from this presentation, it's to put the storytellers at the center of this work so that they are empowered rather than further marginalized.